Welcome to AI Business TV. We're here at the AI Summit San Francisco 2019, and we're very glad to have with us today Aditya Kaul, Research Director at Tractica. How are you keeping?
Doing well, thank you.
So Tractica are very busy here this week. You get involved in a lot of sessions, a lot of workshops. What have you been up to today then?
So I've been chairing the implement track at the AI Summit here. It's going well. Had a good session in the morning. We had quite a few companies talking about not what AI is defined as, but basically how AI is being implemented within their own companies, how vendors are going out and implementing solutions at their own customers. So it's all about getting your hands dirty and implementing AI, which is I think the trend that we've seen over the last 4-5 years that we've been covering AI is essentially we are now moving into a phase where companies are starting to move beyond kind of the hype phase into the deployment, the implementation phase. So I was really happy to chair the track and essentially hear from lots of companies about how they're implementing AI, what the challenges they're facing, and so on and so forth. And we also have another workshop tomorrow that we're doing where we're going to talk about AI use cases in specific verticals, verticals like retail and healthcare, which are actually seeing a lot of activity, one. Secondly, a level of maturity in the use cases in terms of the solutions which are out there. So those are some of the areas where we can actually talk about vendor solutions, compare sort of apples to apples in some cases, not apples to oranges, which is always hard in AI because people kind of approach it from different angles. And then the other thing we're doing in the workshop is talk about AI hardware. I mean, it's kind of, we are in Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, kind of close to it, I guess, in San Francisco. So we thought it'll be good to talk about this sort of foundational layer of AI, which is essentially AI hardware and how that is shaping up and all the different trends within AI hardware, from the chipsets to kind of the sort of the platforms which sit on top of that. So those are some of the ways we're sort of, participating in the AI Summit. And yeah, I also had a keynote session in the morning, talking about the enterprise AI landscape. So that's something we track very closely, and I can talk a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So to that point, actually, so you forecasted recently that kind of revenue generated either directly or indirectly through AI application software is going to increase from, in 2017, it was about just over 5 billion USD. In 2025, it's projected to be 105 billion, just over 105 billion. So, which is absolutely phenomenal. So, where do you kind of see the major pockets of potential, or where's the lion's share of this revenue going to be sitting, really?
Yeah. So the one thing I'll point out firstly is its software revenue.
Yeah.
So there's a whole sort of hardware and services component as well. So in terms of how they sort of, in terms of distribution of the revenue, so we cut it across about 30 different vertical markets. So it's sort of what we call as a long tail distribution. So there's kind of a fat head, which is where you see a lot of activity, a lot of the revenue kind of bundling up, you can call it. And then there's all these other, you can call them niche vertical markets, which are going to, actually the long tail is going to take up a very large proportion of the revenue. So my presentation in the morning was actually talking about these two different groups of verticals. One is the fat head, the other is the long tail. I know they're kind of very crude terms, but essentially the fat head is where companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon and they're in this sort of what you call as a consumer space. They've kind of led with AI and they've kind of built these very massive data centers. And so they're kind of at the leading edge of AI, essentially, the way we see it. But then you also have these other vertical markets which we think are going to shape up in a similar way. So for example, healthcare, automotive, these are some of the verticals. Retail is another one. Another one which we look at is business services. These are all the functions within an enterprise like HR, CRM, workforce collaboration, travel services, all of these sort of what we club as business services. So that vertical also is part of the fat head. So we have this sort of 6 or 7 verticals within that fat head. which means we say that there is an opportunity for companies, for enterprise IT companies, specialist AI enterprise solution providers, cloud AI providers, also possibly vertical specialists to come in and start providing solutions. Now, where do you play in that market? So what I talked about was the workflow of AI. So you can either play on the data side, you can play on the model building side, or you can play in the implementation side. So I basically went through that analysis, and I sort of did that analysis across the fat head and the long tail. And what you find is that there's an opportunity for everyone to play. That's kind of the bottom line.
Yep.
Is that you have to be smart about, one, understanding this landscape, understand how these use cases are spread across all the verticals, and then where do you sort of fit in? What are your key strengths? Where do you come from? What's your background? So if you're a traditional IT company, there are specific areas where you can essentially target. So, for example, I talked about IT companies targeting healthcare. That's an area where there are lots of traditional IT systems already in place. Now, there's clearly a move towards AI. So, what can you add in there? And then business services is another area where IT services companies can play a role. That's slightly different from, say, a cloud AI provider who essentially is trying to target a lot of the newer vertical markets. So they're looking at, for example, automotive. They're looking at public sector is another interesting vertical. So yeah, so I think overall it's all about being smart about one, how this landscape is evolving, and how can you play to your strengths.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So in terms of upcoming research, kind of big pieces of kind of research and forecast that you're doing at the moment at Tractica, kind of what's coming up next?
So I talked about the use cases approach, the verticalization of the markets. And now what we're trying to do going forward is we started actually a report on AI business models. So what we've found is the clients that come to us, the general sort of consensus is that, look, we understand what AI is, we understand how to implement AI to some extent. There are challenges, but yes, we kind of understand the large sort of frameworks that we can apply. But the next question is, how do I start to make money from it? How do I package my solution? What's my go-to-market strategy, right? And that's an area where there's not a lot of good answers. The basic model which is used today is essentially a software licensing SaaS model, which is essentially the traditional old sort of software as a service, software licensing approach, which has been around for many years. And most AI companies today basically are just using that model. Now the question is, what else can you do? How creatively can you think to maybe think of new ways of approaching AI, right? And so that's basically what we're trying to explore in this new report, in the business model report, is again based on verticals, based on use cases, are the new ways of thinking about the business model aspect. So that's one. The other one is essentially a cloud AI report. It's a cloud and data center report, which is, there's a lot of activity from, one, the hyperscalers, which are the Googles and Facebooks, who are basically driving it. But there is a whole other market, which is what we call as enterprise data centers, which are then mostly private on-premise, data centers, where companies like, say, a General Electric or a, Bank of America, or a lot of these large Fortune 100 companies are starting to think about, okay, how much should I invest in this data center infrastructure, and how much of that infrastructure is going to run AI? So that's basically where we're starting to see a lot of interest. A lot of the clients we talk to on the chipset side, on the server and infrastructure side, have a lot of interest in finding out where this is going. And so there's a lot more coming, but we thought we'll put sort of a stake in the ground and have a report and essentially answer some of the questions at least.
Fantastic. So when are these pieces of research set to be published?
So the AI business model report is planned for fourth quarter 2019, and in fact the AI cloud report is going to be published in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, we look forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Aditya.
Thanks a lot, Amy.
Thanks.